Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Friday, July 10th, 2026. I'm Carlene Johnson, the Center Square Washington state government reporter. In today's episode, one of the biggest issues in this year's Washington Supreme Court races is whether the current justices are simply interpreting the law or making policy decisions that affect local budgets and public safety. And our own Tim Clouser today has a one-on-one with Mason County Superior Court Judge David Stevens, who is running this year. We'll get into that. Now, Washington Attorney General's office spokesman told reporters there's nothing to see here. Certainly told us there was no story in an exclusive we've talked quite a bit about here on Washington in Focus Daily, where the Center Square received documents about the behind-the-scenes crafting of the income tax, Senate Bill 6346, and how those legislative communications went for the millionaire's tax. Well, the investigation has been dismissed, really, as nothing to see here, misinformation, nonsense. But we've received some more information, and my colleagues TJ Martinell and Tim Clouser have some of that for you. And then an incredibly inspiring young man who spent 13 years behind bars, turned everything around with the Out Impact program run by someone I really admire, Burton, shares why that program changed his life. And we also have some perspective on the program from one of its board members, a former Seattle Police Department retired deputy chief who serves again on that board of directors. He shares why he is so dedicated to expanding the program, which has a 98% success rate for ending the recidivism cycle in the Department of Corrections. All right, let's get started. One of the big issues in this year's Washington Supreme Court races is whether the current justices are simply interpreting the law or potentially making policy decisions that affect local budgets and public safety. And our own Tim Clouser today has a one-on-one with Mason County Superior Court Judge David Stevens. He's running for position 3. I talked about the state Supreme Court's new public defense caseload standards. Stevens criticizes the rule, arguing that it's got a major impact on taxpayers, forcing counties to hire far more public defenders at a time when there may not be enough attorneys or money available at all. So here is part of that interview.
Part of the reason with the domestic violence filings in Spokane was also the new caseload standards. And I know you've raised concerns about that as well. Can you kind of spell out for voters what the policy-making decision was there from the court and whether or not you think that should have been left to the legislature?
So there had always been a rule that the day you graduate from law school and pass the bar, from that day you're held to the standards of every other attorney, regardless of how many years you've been an attorney. The fact that you're brand new, you can't go if you screw something up and tell the court, well, I'm new. That won't fly. You're held to the same standards. And there had been some cases where there were these contract public defenders. They took way too many cases and they basically were just pleading everybody out. They weren't effective. And so the Washington State Supreme Court has always been being able to go after on the rules of professional conduct for attorneys who weren't doing a competent job. And they could enforce those rules. But they feel that the public defenders are overworked and not enough cases. The cases were settling to the disadvantage of the defendants. So they decided that what they would do is they would limit the caseloads. They got a hold of studies by groups who have an ideological outlook, and they decided these would be the standards that they would do. But it didn't do what they wanted. It didn't significantly change anything. So then recently they decided, so basically, and this is an oversimplification, they said, okay, 147 felony cases a public defender could do. And then it didn't have the effect that they wanted. The policy wasn't having the effect. You can see where this pragmatism comes into for policymaking. So then they lowered it to 47. There are literally not enough attorneys who practice criminal law, and I'm including the prosecutors, where they can staff. So we're budgeted for 3 public defenders in Mason County. In order to comply with this new rule, we would have to go to 8 or 9. That is going to wreck the budget. This is going to cost all kinds of money. So they also gave the option. See, it's so clear that they're pursuing a policy because they said, okay, we understand this might be difficult to implement. So we expect that it will be fully implemented in 10 years. You can go 10% every year. Doesn't that sound like what the legislature would do? And so, but then they didn't realize, or perhaps they did and they just don't care, places like King County, Pierce County, the ones with high population where they have more resources, they went to immediate implementation of this new policy. So you're a public defender and you have a choice. You can come to my county and maybe you'll get 120 felony cases, or you can go work in one of these other counties that has gone to full implementation, and then you'll have 47. And you'll probably be paid more anyways because they have more money and they pay their attorneys more. When you have a supply-demand problem, you don't make the demand higher. It's just nuts. They're pursuing this policy. They've always been able to go after attorneys who weren't competently handling their cases.
Now, months after the Center Square received exclusive unredacted documents, nearly 1,000 pages of documents, that kind of gave us a behind-the-scenes peek into how state lawmakers were working with the AG's office and figuring out how to craft the income tax to basically get around voters. My colleague TJ Martinell has written several articles as he's received more documents back from the AG's office and the Secretary of State's office into how all of that went down. But the more they say there's nothing to see here, the more we see there is a lot that needs to be revealed. And there are new emails and new information. So here are my colleagues, again, Tim Klauser and TJ Martinell, with more on this.
Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with the Center Square's Washington State Investigative reporter, TJ Martinell, here to talk about what the State Attorney General's office called no story after TJ uncovered a record showing that the state's new income tax was part of a plan to overturn nearly 100 years of Supreme Court precedent barring progressive income taxes in Washington state. TJ, who exactly said there was no story here?
That was the deputy communications director for the Attorney General's office. And it was so my story came out on April 20th about the records that I got that effectively shown that, not effectively, just explicitly showed that there was communications between the Attorney General's office and lawmakers, including in particular Senator Peterson, who was the prime sponsor of the income tax. And that the purpose of the income tax was to trigger a lawsuit that would force the state Supreme Court to take up the question of whether income is property. It's been ruled or considered to be property since an amendment was added to the state constitution in the 1930s by the state Supreme Court. So there's been a string of rulings that have said income is property and therefore a progressive income tax is unconstitutional. If the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of this tax and said income is actually not property, then a progressive income tax would be legalized, which was the whole purpose of this bill. And so when I published the story, other media outlets reached out to the Attorney General's office for comment. And this is when they began saying that there was no story here. And other media outlets ran stuff, right? Como, Cairo, Fox 13 interviewed me. They interviewed Senator Peterson. And then the Wall Street Journal's editorial board issued an editorial in response to my story and the communications that were going on. There's numerous again, this got a lot of media traction, and I was interviewed by a bunch of different people on radio and on people's podcasts. So I'm not okay that they can say that there's no story there, but that's really not the role of public information officers that work for for state agencies or any public entity for that matter.
Oh, I was just going to say, if anything, it calls into question that communications manager's news judgment at the AGO, considering that, there's nearly 100 years of legal precedent barring progressive income taxes in Washington state, and these emails show uncover an explicit attempt to overturn that precedent. It's surprising that they're trying to downplay the release of those records by saying that there's no story there. It doesn't sound like it stopped any local media outlets.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's interesting is that they said there's nothing wrong with communications that were occurring. Well, okay, that's even if, let's say, a city council passed an ordinance that increased the local sales tax, and a reporter writes a story about it, and the public information officer for the city says there was absolutely nothing wrong with passing that. Well, that's not. It's still a story. From a taxpayer perspective, which is how we cover stuff, it was a taxpayer-funded attorney general's office and a taxpayer-funded a lawmaker using taxpayer resources money to craft a bill that was a tax itself, so that it could legalize a tax that could potentially apply to every single state resident. And it's also a tax that voters have rejected 10 times since the 1930s. So the notion that there's no story there, basically what that's saying is taxpayers would not be interested in knowing that. And here's the other thing I would say. Let's say that you're a reporter and you got these records and you sat on them and your editor found out about it because you said there was no story. How long do you think you keep your job? Any editor worth his salt would look at this and react the same way as a guy with a winning lottery ticket. So that's kind of what it would be like. It would be the equivalent of a report of a guy getting a lottery ticket and throwing it in the trash, and then he goes home and tells his wife that.
Yeah, and I understand they're saying, oh, well, it's not illegal for us to advise the legislature. That's a normal thing. And maybe it is. Okay. But like you're saying, I mean, that doesn't take away the
Nowhere, here's
what's going on here.
Nowhere in our story. First of all, there's this really bad habit of people conflating our coverage with the people we interview. Just because somebody says something in a story doesn't mean that I personally agree with it. I'm quoting people, and there's this weird conflating of the writer of the story with the people that he interviews. And so nowhere in the story did anybody say that the communications were illegal. They may have said they were inappropriate. That's if Rob McKenna says that, that's Rob McKenna saying that. If Jackson Maynard with Citizen Action Defense Fund, if he says it's inappropriate, that's his opinion. And so but nowhere do we say that's again, we're talking to other people and getting their opinions on this stuff. And even if there was nothing wrong with it, that taxpayers deserve to know that this is going on, that the purpose of this tax is to get a progressive income tax. Because even if it doesn't apply to them directly, even if I don't have to file, first of all, they call it a millionaire's tax. It's actually an income tax where everyone but people who make over $1 million are exempt, but that exemption could be easily removed. So it's technically an income tax that without the exemption would apply to everybody, but even not. Look at the response to the millionaire's tax. There's jobs that are moving out of the state. There's people who make a lot of money and fund stuff that are packing up and selling their homes and moving. So this idea that it doesn't affect you directly doesn't mean it affects you. That's not how it works. And it affects taxpayers. I'm sorry, but like, you're using their resources to advance a political agenda of getting progressive income tax in the state. And so even if it's not inappropriate, unethical, or illegal, they still deserve to know that this is going on because it's their money. So the notion that this is not a story, and other media outlets obviously jumped on it. And why would Jerry Cornfield ask for the records within hours of my story breaking? If it wasn't a story, why would he ask for them? Clearly, he thought there was something to be found there. and they had no problem giving him the records within hours. So, again, I'm not really sure what else to say on in regarding that, regarding whether or not it's a story. I mean, I interviewed Jackson Maynard, who, again, this is his opinion. He said it was the biggest political story in decades. I mean, it's helped shape the narrative around this discussion around the initiative to repeal the income tax, because it's no longer about the tax itself. It's about the fact that if it's not repealed by the initiative, it's probably going to get in front of the state Supreme Court, and there's a good chance that a progressive income tax could be legalized.
Yeah, and as they're trying to downplay the records that they released you, showing the real intent behind this whole income tax. I mean, they're telling people there's no story here. They're sensationalizing something. At the same time, they never came back and asked for any corrections to the story, did they?
Well, no, because we just literally quoted the documents, and they said that, we're reading into stuff. Our headline literally says, exclusive, the millionaire's tax is meant to legalize a progressive income tax. That is, I'm sorry, go look at what Senator Peterson said. He is a lawyer, and as people can know, when you're discussing things with lawyers, sometimes getting them to give you a very direct, explicit statement is like trying to nail Jello to the wall with a penny nail. Like, it's very difficult, and he's explicitly saying this, and yet we quote him and summarize or paraphrase what he said, and we're being told that that's not accurate. He wants to legalize a progressive income tax, and he wants to use this millionaire's tax as the means of doing so. That is the primary purpose of this bill, and the Attorney General's office helped him craft it so that it couldn't be struck down under any other legal precedent or legal argument. Don't call it an excise tax. Don't have the marriage penalty in there. Keep it, nice and tight and focused so that the Supreme Court can't find any other reason to strike it down. Okay. That's a story. And I couldn't imagine any reporter reading that and thinking, well, it's like, I'm sure that there are some reporters out there, but by all means, continue to say that these aren't stories, so I keep getting the exclusives or whatever, because I can only imagine how many reporters out there that are sitting on stories that they could be reporting on, because for reasons that I don't know, but I'm not even sure what else to add other than the fact that it didn't take me very long. It took me about, 20 seconds after reading the records to realize that there was a massive story to be had there.
Well, TJ, despite the Attorney General's office attempt to downplay the credibility of that story, or that there was a story at all to competing news outlets, I appreciate you getting those records, as I'm sure those competitor news outlets and our readers appreciate as well. And for anyone hoping to catch that coverage in any of TJ's stories, you can read them at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.
Now, in an episode earlier this week, I shared part of an interview with someone I very much admire, a woman by the name of Ginny Burton, who spent many years inside a system, believing she had no future. She was herself incarcerated for many years and spent nearly 30 years trapped in a cycle of addiction. But today she is an author. She is a nationally recognized speaker, and she's really proven that transformation is not only possible, but it's replicable. And she's doing that through the Out Impact Coalition. They go into the prisons and they work with the inmates who have committed very serious crimes. These aren't guys that are in jail or in prison for, a short period of time. Many of these guys are in prison for 10, 20, even 30 years. She often meets them after they've been incarcerated for quite a bit of time, maybe moved from a maximum security facility like in Walla Walla to the correctional facility in Forks, where she runs her Out Impact program. So these are guys doing hard time. And she has an incredible success rate with these gentlemen. 55 of the men who've gone through her program and have since been released are living productive lives, have not gone back in. Only one man ended up back behind bars, and he's now re-enrolled in her program and proving to be, a mentor to others incarcerated, getting him into this program. It is transformative, it is working, and it comes at a fraction of the cost of incarcerating individuals. It costs about $4,500 to put one of these inmates through her 6-month program and offer them some sort of partnership once they are out, whether that's job training, education, helping them find housing, helping them get reconnected with family members. I want to introduce you to an incredible young man who completed her program. His name is Tone Williams. He lives in Moses Lake now. He served 13 years hard time. He ended up stealing firearms, reselling firearms, and it's a very serious crime. But the man he is today is a completely transformed version of who he was before. And he credits Ginny Burton's Out Impact program with that transformation.
The first thing I would say is that it works. I don't know how much more proof you need. Like, the guys that have gone through her program to date are not going back to prison. Could that change in 5 years? Yeah, but they're not going back to prison. Like, it works. I don't know what more a person needs to see. The other thing is, this is probably the cheapest and easiest method to reduce recidivism. It doesn't require the hiring of any doctors or psychologists, psychiatrists. It doesn't require medicating people and prescriptions, or there's almost zero liability. You know what I mean? I feel like these organizations that have the power to provide the funding and provide the opportunity to access, they're taking zero risk. It's all reward, and they get to say that they helped make this happen. Like, they get to be a part of the solution.
So how when you're talking to people, you can just sometimes tell that they're authentic, genuine, or you can see through that they're not, and that you're being, fed a line. Tone Williams is one of those people, and I hope you can see it in the video, that he is living a life with, an authentic life, with integrity, and he can be trusted. And so I asked him about his life today, and it's pretty cool.
I'm currently living in an Oxford house, a clean and sober house, and I transferred to here in March. And I'm on GRE, so I have an ankle monitor on, which comes off in 50 days. So I'm almost done. I transferred to this Lowe's. I was at this Lowe's for 2 months before I got promoted to supervisor of my department over people that had been there for years, I feel like I'm doing great. Like, I'm healthy. I've saved. I've invested. I haven't gotten in any trouble in work release, on ankle monitor, nor in prison. I went 13 years in prison, never receiving a major infraction. So it's like, that streak is still alive. I'm doing well. They would just buy my daughter a brand new phone for her 17th birthday. Like, that feels good because I wasn't able to do those things. I could provide $50, $100 here and there, but to be able to really provide for them now feels really good.
And I want to introduce you to retired Seattle Police Deputy Chief Eric Barden. He's a member of Ginny's Out Board of Directors, and he believes very much in what she is doing, as opposed to the revolving door of incarceration for so many. But he told me until society starts really expecting more and holding lawmakers, holding agency officials accountable, nothing will change.
Without sort of community expectation for better outcomes, and that manifesting in our electeds who are funding programs, that's the machine that won't change. So we as citizens can can hold folks to a higher standard. We can say, hey, we expect our carceral system to provide opportunities for people to change their path. And we have to disabuse people of this idea that, well, that'll teach them. That'll teach them. Going to prison will teach them. Well, okay, I can tell you right now, we've done a meta data study over I don't know how many decades. Doesn't work. If it worked, it would have worked, and it didn't. So we need to tweak our program and provide people with the tools and resources necessary to be successful once they get out. And that starts with allowing them to address those issues internally while they're incarcerated.
Now, Jenny Burton's grant funding was cut to $80,000 last year. She also operates off of, some donations. A lot of people very much believe in what she's doing because of the success rate that you can't argue against. But it's not enough for her to even take a paycheck. So she's literally doing a walk across the state. Starts a week from Sunday. On the 19th of July, she will venture out starting in North Bend, and she will spend up through the end of the month, ending in Spokane's Riverfront Park on July 31st. She's got people walking with her along the way. She's got people pledging her, per mile, some people just making donations. And you can walk with her as well. Joe Public can go and walk along with her and learn more about the program if you're so inclined and maybe have some free time in the second half of this month. I'm putting up an article this afternoon as well with links to find out a lot more about her and the program and the success rate. She's been featured in some national publications. She published a book that came out earlier this year called The Gabriel Plan. And she's just a remarkable woman. I believe very much in the success of what she's doing and the lives that she's transforming. And so that's why I wanted to highlight that, putting up the article, as well as featuring it twice this week in our episodes of Washington in Focus Daily. So that's a wrap on this Friday, July 10th episode. As always, thank you for watching. I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.